guys, welcome back to my math YouTube channel. Today I am back with this section on solving trig equations. Guys, in this section I'm going to talk about almost 10 different types of equations, especially they will involve trig functions, and that's why they call trig equations, because they involve some type of trig functions ranging from sine, cosine to other different types. Okay, so guys, we'll start with simpler ones, and then as we become confident solving the simple examples, we'll build upon those concepts, and then we will start solving some more challenging problems. Guys, there's few things that I want to tell you before we start solving these trig equations. First of all, I would like each one of us to have a unit circle handy in front of you, because we are heavily going to rely on the unit circle. Or if you have a calculator, you should also have a calculator with you. Guys, if you don't have any of those two things, then at least try to have a textbook where you can find the unit circle, or you would know you can find the angles for different trig ratios. Okay, guys, in addition to that, I should also tell you that solving trig equations is not too complicated. In a way, it is similar to solving algebraic equations, and I'm sure that you already know how to solve, or you have experience with solving linear equations or quadratic and then cubic equations. That is things that you have already seen in your algebra courses or in your pre-calc courses. So we're going to kind of bring that together, and then we have few other things or few other simple concepts that we have to bring in order for us to be able to solve trig equations. Guys, I'm starting with a simpler one, and then we will start doing some more challenging ones. Now, if you look at this particular equation, it is a trig equation because it involves a trig function. In this case, it is the cosine of x. And our goal or our aim here is to solve for the variable, which is true for solving any type of an equation. In this case, we are trying to find that x, but we know that x in the context to this problem is basically solving for angle. Okay, so in order to find that x, so let us first figure out that we want to evaluate or find that x. Now, in order to find that x, the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to isolate the cosine of x, right? And that is exactly what you would do if I have a algebraic equation of the form, let's say 2x equals to -1. You like to isolate the x, right? In this case, we first have to isolate the cosine x, because cosine and x are not separate quantities, they are together. It's a trig function, so we cannot just isolate x right away. We can only isolate the cosine of x. So to isolate cosine of x, which means to solve for cosine of x by itself, we just have to divide both sides by 2. So if I divide both sides by 2, we get cosine of x equals to -1/2. So I'm going to box this equation from here. Guys, my goal is to find the values for x for which the cosine of the x equals to -1/2. Now, from here, you can just directly go on to the unit circle and look at the unit circle and find out what values of x give me cosine of that value equal to -1/2. It is also, you can also think in terms of the inverse, right? But guys, we don't really have to apply inverses or use inverses really. All we have to do is go back to the unit circle. In the unit circle, we know that the x coordinate gives us the cosine values, and the corresponding y coordinate gives me the sine values. So to see the cosine values, this one other thing that one can already use in order to make life a little bit easier, which is, guys, it has a negative value. So we know cosine is, let us draw that those quadrants here. This is the first one, the second, this is the second one, second quadrant, then third quadrant, and then the fourth quadrant. And if I draw my unit circle, this is my x-axis, this is my y-axis. Guys, cosine is negative. So in the first quadrant, everything is positive, but we have a negative value. So let us see that where can we find that angle, because having a negative value for cosine, it kind of restricts it probably in one or two quadrants. So here everything is positive, here only sine is positive. That means cosine negative, we can find negative cosine here, so it should be in this quadrant, second quadrant. And then in the third quadrant, cosine is positive, so we won't find it in the third quadrant. No, sorry, in the third quadrant, tangent and its reciprocal is positive, everything else is negative. So yeah, we can find it in the third quadrant as well. In the fourth quadrant, cosine is positive, so we won't find it in the fourth quadrant either. So we won't find it in the fourth, we won't find it in the first. So we can only narrow down our search if we are looking at the unit circle, that we are only going to be looking in the second and the third quadrant. There is no need for us to look at look on the first or the fourth quadrant. So looking at the second quadrant, guys, I'm looking for negative 1/2, and I see 120 degrees gives me cosine value negative 1/2. That means x equals to negative 120 degrees, which is equivalent to 2 pi over 3. Sorry, I don't know why I said negative, which is positive, which is 2 pi over 3 radians. And then, guys, that is not the only value. We can find another value for that x, that angle, which is in the third quadrant. And in the third quadrant, if I look at 240 degrees, I again have the cosine value of that 240 degrees is negative 1/2. So x can also be 240 degrees. And what is that equivalent to in the radians? In the radians, it's 4 pi over 3. 4 pi over 3 radians. So guys, that was not too complicated. All you have to do is isolate the cosine, and then you have to look in the unit circle. But this negative already tells us that it is restricted only in the second and the third quadrant. So we didn't have to even worry about looking into the first and the fourth. We only look into the second and the third, and these are the two values that satisfy the condition that the cosine of these values is negative 1/2. But guys, there's one more thing that one has to keep in mind. When you think about the unit circle and these angles, we also have to think about those coterminal angles, because when you can go around this, one can go around this unit circle infinitely many times, right? You can go around once, so you get 360, then you go back again, you get 720, and so on and so forth. So guys, these are not the only two values that give us the cosine of 120 is negative 1/2. We know cosine and sine, and they are periodic functions. They keep on occurring over and over again. We know that from the graphs of those functions. So guys, there is one extra thing that one has to do with these angles. One has to add a 2 pi to it, but then we're not just adding 2 pi. It goes around over and over and over again. If you think in terms of going around the unit circle, or even if you think in terms of the graph of cosine function, it is a periodic function which just repeats forever, right? From the right hand side as well as from the left hand side. So it is not just 2 pi, we say we add 2 pi k to both of these values, and then all we have to say is that k is any integer. And when I say k is any integer, it can be positive, it can be negative. And guys, we already know that basic information from our earlier sections on graphs of the trig functions or nature of these trig functions, where if you can go on the right, that means you're adding something, or you can go on the left, that means you're subtracting something. Same thing, guys, with here. If you think in terms of going around the unit circle, if you are right here, you want to add 360, you will again go back and reach here. If you subtract 360, then you go back and you still reach at the same place. So guys, the point is, you have to, if it is not restricting the values for x, then there's not going to be just 1 or 2 or 3 values. There's going to be infinitely many values, depending on depending on what the values for k you want to choose. So guys, k can be any integer, and based on that we can get so many different values. But you don't have to write all of those. Just by writing plus 2 pi k with both of these and saying that k is an any integer, it can be positive or a negative integer, this covers all the different solutions for this x. Okay, so again, I don't want to make it too complicated, and guys, it is not too complicated. All you have to do is, once you find the angle, you just have to add 2 pi k, and you also have to mention that k is an any integer, because it can be plus and minus both. So if you don't say k is any integer, then one may only think that k is just a positive number, or one may think k is a negative number, or we may not even know what the k stands for. So one has to write that k is any integer. Once you write it, that completes the solution for this. And then it depends on you whether you just want to write the solution in the degrees or radians or both. It's up to you. Okay, guys, this is example 1. We started with a very simple example. Now from next example, we are going to start actually just increasing the challenge level, and I'm sure that you will start understanding and appreciating these problems. I will see you in the next